But of course here today, where we're holding this media conference at the Caboolture Town Square, this is an example whereby the infrastructure investment, $3 million, the last time I was the infrastructure minister and regional development and local government minister, to fix up this town square, to improve the safety, to build the children's playground, to make a difference to the quality of life here in this great town. The truth is that right throughout Queensland I can go and point to practical differences that I've made when I was the minister during the Rudd and Gillard governments. That puts me, I think, in a good position with regard to talking with Queenslanders and, importantly, listening to Queenslanders. I've said before in the last few days that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should spend twice as much time listening as we do talking. We've just had a very good meeting with the Mayor of Moreton Bay Council, and I'll continue. We've had some other discussions with people around the hub here in Caboolture. We'll have further discussions this afternoon, and later I'll be joined, as well as Susan, with Corinne Mulholland, our unsuccessful candidate for Petrie, and Ali France, our unsuccessful candidate for Dixon. We need to acknowledge, firstly, that we lost the election. We need to talk to people who have worked hard for us for the cause of Labor. But we also need to talk to people who wanted to vote Labor but who chose not to, particularly those who were thinking very closely of doing it, and all the opinion polls showed that people were thinking of voting Labor, but of course we know that in the end we simply didn't get enough support. So I'm here. It's no accident I'm here in Queensland as my first stop. I was here many, many times. I've been to this electorate, and right throughout Queensland I've been to electorates, whether it's Maranoa or Kennedy, whether it be the seats in southeast Queensland, and importantly, the seats right down the coast, be it Leichhardt, Herbert, Flynn, Capricornia, Hinkler. All of these seats have infrastructure where we've made a difference, particularly the upgrades in the Bruce Highway, where under the Howard government, $1.3 billion of investment over 12 years. While I was the minister, $6.7 billion in half that time. That's the difference that we made. Some of those projects are still proceeding, but they were begun under us. The important projects around Townsville, around Mackay, around Gladstone, and right indeed down the coast, including the Karoidakara upgrade north of here, around Gympie, which was described by the person who was the Transport Minister and local member for Wide Bay as the worst road in Australia. Well, it took a Labor government to fix it. I intend to talk with Queenslanders and to engage with Queenslanders over the coming 3 years. And today is just the start of that process.
Can you give a definitive position on the Adani coal mine? We've heard 6 weeks of what has been described as quite a wishy-washy position from Labor.
Well, the fact is that this is not a government project. It's a private sector project. And what happens with private sector projects is they receive environmental approvals. The Adani project has received the approvals of the federal government through the EPBC Act, not once but twice. And it's important as well that legislation says, very clearly, says that decisions must be made on the basis of the science, the recommendations, looking at CSIRO, for example, looking at the impact on water. So that's the process at the federal level. The state government is looking at its approvals process, and then it's a matter for the company to decide whether, once it's approved, in terms of the economics of going forward. And if they do that, that's a decision for the company. This is not a government project, and that is very important as well. But I'll say this about the project, and I'll say this about Queenslanders. One of the things that Queenslanders don't like is the sort of thing that happened at Claremont, where you had people from down south coming down and telling Queenslanders what was good for them, and lecturing them and shouting at them. They don't want that. What Queenslanders want is what other people around Australia want. They want jobs, they want security for their family, they want all of that. And my experience in engaging with people here in Queensland goes back to sitting down, going to the Hewenden pub with Bob Catter, engaging with people here during the election at Narangba, engaging with people around, talking with them about what their needs are. I'll continue to do that. My understanding is the Queensland Government have set a timeline in terms of the proposals, and we'll await that. In terms of the federal government decision-making processes, they've concluded. They're over.
But further from that, it is going to be, if approved, one of Australia's, if not at full capacity, Australia's largest coal mine. Surely that is something that you have a position on as the leader of the Labor Party.
What the EPBC Act says, by the way, is that decisions must be made upon science, not upon politics. And people know that. People know that. And when you look at the sort of decisions that have been made, there's a bit of conversation this week about coal. This is what Scott Morrison said on the 13th of August 2018. But let's not think there's cheap new coal. There's not. New cheap coal is a bit of a myth. That's what he had to say. They're the government. They're the government. They need to be held to account. And one of the things that I've said very clearly, is that we will hasten slowly. With regard to policy decisions, we will work cooperatively. I'll consult with caucus. The new shadow ministry, of course, is to be elected on Thursday. Can I say this as well? We won't be announcing portfolios on Thursday. We'll be leaving that over coming days because, once again, this is not a sprint. There is not an election in July. There is not an election this year. There is an election due in 2022. And so the decisions that Labor advocates at that election are a long way away. I've said very clearly also that all policies, when you lose an election, the policies lapse. That's what happens. So we will be defining our proposals on our timeline, based upon our values, put forward very clearly. Hang on, you've had a couple of goes.
Do you plan to have any, given the poor showing in Queensland, do you plan to have any Queenslanders in significant cabinet positions?
I plan to have Queenslanders in significant roles. You'll have to wait for that process again. I'm not going to preempt the caucus processes. Caucus elects the front bench. I'll obviously make my views known, and I have. And I'll continue to do that with caucus colleagues, but I'll do it respectfully as well in terms of the processes. I mean, one of the things about politics I think that is frustrating for people who are observers of politics rather than participants is that the cycle means that people are pushed to just say things at any particular moment on the spur, on the basis of the need to fill the void, fill the vacuum. Well, the truth is, we suffered a significant defeat on May the 18th. It's time for us to regroup. We're a long way away from forming from competing in the next election. It's 2022. And frankly, we'll take our time, hasten slowly, not be obsessed by the 24-hour media cycle. You won't see, for example, I say really up front, just it seems like a long time ago since the declaration of the ballot, but it was yesterday. You won't see me doing doorstops every day. Give you the big tip. Because one of the things that I will do, whoever fills the positions, and certainly Queensland will be well represented, what we will do is use our team. Because I tell you what, one of the things I'm certain about what will occur after Thursday is I'd rather have my team than Scott Morrison and his team, who he had to hide during the election campaign, who now, due to his arrogance and hubris, has appointed both Arthur Sinodinos and Mitch Fifield to overseas posts. He didn't go to an election saying, vote for us and we'll give two of our senior people overseas postings at my first press conference. And I say this to the media as well. One of the things that defined the last campaign, and we will look and examine, we'll have a review. But it's my view, I'll tell you this, and in terms of, without looking at the science, that during this campaign, we looked like a government in waiting, they looked like an opposition. It is time that the Fourth Estate held the government to account. They've just been elected. Our policies, frankly, are academic at this point in time. Their policies actually matter. They're the government. They don't have an energy policy. Ask them what their policy is. What's their policy on new coal-fired power stations? Some of them say that's what they want here in Queensland. Why aren't they being held to account? Because not just Scott Morrison, this is what Peter Dutton had to say on the 14th of March 2018. We've got taxpayers' money to spend. The question is whether the federal government should be building a coal-fired power station. I don't agree with that. I don't think we should be. Now, I got asked about that on radio this morning on the Alan Jones program. The government needs to be held for account. They don't have an agenda for their third term. They can't go through this term like they did the last one, where their only agenda was fighting each other. The Nationals fighting each other, the Liberals fighting each other, and the LNP in Queensland not quite being sure who they were fighting, but certainly being in the blue. What they weren't doing is governing properly, and we intend to hold them to account.
The PM said,
hang on one tick. Hang on. No, you don't get all the questions. We'll have one each, and then you're going to go.
That's a really important issue.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you'll get a go. You'll get a go.
The PM said he wants to toughen the law enforcement aspect of IR. Christian Porter's been appointed to both as Attorney General and Industrial Relations Minister. What do you think this is saying about the government's approach to workplace issues?
Well, we'll wait and see. But Christian Porter, it is very unusual, let me say this, for someone to be appointed Attorney General and Minister for Industrial Relations. But I reckon that what might have happened is that you shouldn't read too much into it. Because if I was Scott Morrison sitting down with the talent pool that he had, it's not surprising that he had to double up and triple up on jobs. Because what do you do with some of these people? What do you do with people who had to be hidden during the election campaign? What do you do with people who have clouds over them over a range of issues, including water buybacks, are still there for Angus Taylor and Barnaby Joyce? There's a range of issues that still need to be dealt with, and we will be holding the government to account. But we'll wait and see. We think that the industrial relations system should be characterised by fairness and balance between employers and employees. I've said consistently that business and unions have common interests. Let's make sure that the legislative system around that recognises that, rather than be conflict-based, which so much of the government's position has been in terms of attacking the rights of working people.
Well, the people you've met so far here today, what have people told you is the reason why you failed to win this seat and others like it?
Well, look, there's a range of reasons have been given. There's no doubt that from the feedback and the discussions we've had, that dividend imputation was an issue. There's no question about that. There's no doubt at all that for many people who would not have been impacted at all, they thought that there was a new tax being placed upon them. And people have seen the misleading ads which are there. So in terms of the impact, that is one of the issues that has been raised. We don't want to preempt this process, but we'll continue to talk with people about that. I've said very clearly that I think Labor got some of our positioning wrong. I'm not saying that after the event, by the way. Go back and have a look at my Whitlam oration or my John Button lecture or other major speeches that I gave in 2018, where I raised those issues. one of the things that I continued to do as a shadow minister is work very closely with the business community because I think that was a very important issue.
Anthony Albanese, late last year, well, middle of last year, you spoke about in your blueprint for government, unions and also the business sector and the civil society.
Yes.
You needed to do more engagement. Can I ask you, what about the small businesses? Is there anything in the blueprint for you to start bringing forth some new policies in to help the small business community of Australia?
Oh, look, absolutely. Look, one of the things, and I spoke about this in my speech yesterday, about the small business community are so important. Small and family businesses are the driving force behind our economy. So much of what happens. Mum and dads, families going out there, investing, taking risks in order to create employment and create economic activity. What's more as well is entrepreneurial activity is so important. We live in the fastest growing region of the world. And one of the things that you see in places like Singapore, where I visited, there's a Singapore hub for startups where there is a whole Australian section working there. I visited there just 2 years ago. It's a pity that they have to go to Singapore to feel like they have that opportunity of engaging in startups. There are new companies. As the economy changes, there's new opportunities. And I think that Australia is falling behind in some of those opportunities. So, for example, one of the things with regard to jobs here in Queensland that we committed to during the election campaign, and something that I discussed not just with the Labor Party but was supported by Bob Katter, for example, was the upgrade of the railway between Mount Isa and Townsville. Now, when you look at that, what you look at is that resources sector with minerals like lithium, that will be so important, a necessary component of battery storage. And there is a real opportunity for us to grow manufacturing jobs in North Queensland, far North Queensland and Central Queensland, because everything that goes into those products is there. When you speak to people in Townsville about what is going on at the port, they'll tell you that the biggest import coming in at the moment is solar panels, going into places like the Kidston solar hub that I visited during that time. Now, shouldn't we be, given our resources going in to produce these products, manufacturing it here so that we benefit from the job creation here? These are the sort of things that I want to talk with Queenslanders about. I don't start from a 0 point. I start from someone who has engaged, who has gone throughout this state and talked with people about these issues.
Do you think the people in central Queensland would like the Labor Party to take a definitive stance on Adani?
I think what the people of central Queensland want, and is reasonable, is certainty. That's what they want. They want to know, is this project going ahead? They want the environmental decisions to be gone through with rigour, and that is perfectly reasonable for them to want that, and I want that too. We need to make sure that we get certainty in terms of the outcomes. I'm all for environmental rigour. We need to do that. We need to make sure that when we approve any project, what we're not doing is approving a project in one place to create jobs but losing more jobs somewhere else, which is what happens, for example, if you cause damage to the Great Artesian Basin. Will have an impact. So we need to make sure that those approvals, based upon science, not based upon politics, based upon science. And I've been consistent about this. I've been consistent about this the whole way through. I've been consistent about this for the people who have occupied my office on a regular basis, stopping people getting support that they need from Centrelink or migration advice. Why that was productive is beyond me. That's a decision for people, and people have got a right to protest. But they've also got I think, an obligation to show respect for people. I have respect for the people of Central Queensland. I've gone to Central Queensland and engaged. I was in Rockhampton a number of times during the campaign. I've been to Gladstone many times. When I've been there, it's been about promoting government projects like Calliope Crossroads, like the Gladstone Port Access Road, like the Rockhampton Ring Road, like the Yeppoon projects, like Yeppoon floodplain, the new bridge there, all of that. I have been either committed to and been a part of funding and creating those jobs, the Mackay Ring Road, or committing to them in the case of the Rockhampton Ring Road that we did before the government, and then the government followed. There's a range of areas in which we led during our time in opposition under Bill Shorten. I want us to lead on some issues as well, but the time for leading isn't before the caucus has even met.
How are you going to balance the concerns of voters and electorates like yours, where, like it or not, Adani has become a symbol of the battle for action on climate change, with the demands for certainty that you talked about in Central Queensland?
Well, the first thing you do is by being consistent. And I've been consistent about my views, which is that you should listen to the science. I've been consistent about understanding the way the EPBC Act works as well, which is that it actually ensures that there should not be political interference, that there should be decisions made by the Environment Minister based upon scientific advice from the CSIRO and other bodies. So being consistent, getting the outcomes right is the key. Making sure that I believe let me say on climate change, which is the big issue. Climate change is real. I think the science is in. What it doesn't mean is that you adopt the position of the Abbott government, is the position of trying to pick winners and make decisions. And they end up not doing it. You end up doing nothing. That's what's happened. So you have a whole debate over whether there should be government subsidy of a new coal-fired power station. The truth is that no one in the private sector is coming forward putting their hand up saying, I want to build a new coal-fired power station. There's nothing to stop anyone putting forward an application to do that now. We actually live in a market economy. We don't live in a state-controlled economy. And that's important. That's important because not only am I not a climate sceptic, I'm a market sceptic. So what you do is you set up the mechanisms across the board and you abide by them. You go through it. You ensure that as change goes through the economy, and change does happen in the economy over a period of time, that it's made in the interests of working people. And action on climate change is not only consistent with job creation, it is an important driver of job creation. And that's one of the things that the people in the Hue and the Pub told me. That's one of the things that all of the mayors and the communities around this great state have told me. I've been consistent. I'll continue to do so. I'll continue to argue that what we need from the government, and I note today that Scott Morrison has said that he's interested in some bipartisanship. I think that's a good thing if that is the case that he has. But you need to have a policy. And they came up with a policy. It was called the NEG. It was supported by Scott Morrison. He's the leader of the Liberal Party. Was supported by Josh Frydenberg. He's the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. Well, that perhaps could be a starting point for a discussion. I've said consistently that people have conflict fatigue. They want agreement where agreement can be reached.
Christian Porter says the idea of an Indigenous voice to Parliament is too vague. What's your approach going to be?
Well, our approach will be constructive, but that's better than saying it's a third chamber of Parliament. So perhaps I'll recognise some progress where there is some and give some credit there. I hope that the government is constructive about this. We're diminished as a nation when we don't recognise the fact that we have the oldest continuous civilisation on the planet, right here in Australia. It enriches all of us, but we're also all diminished by the fact that they are the most disadvantaged group in our nation. And part of that is recognition in the Constitution. Part of that as well, of course, is practical steps. How do we close the gap on education, on health, on infant mortality, on drug addiction, on incarceration? How do we deal with all of these issues? Quite frankly, no government has done enough so that we can say, yep, you got all that done. The truth is it requires all governments to act, and it requires the whole community as one to act. And I want to work with the government to bring this debate forward. And on that note, I thank you very much.